This Sunday, 4 months after incredible storms inundated the Green Mountain State, washing away homes and businesses, the costs are becoming clear.
This is $1 billion storm.
Yes.
Now, as winter approaches, what will happen to those whose homes could not be saved? And in the capital city, where shops are reopening and historic state buildings remain empty, the question still hanging overhead.
The sad and frustrating thing is that, this is going to happen again. We know that Montpelier is vulnerable. We're vulnerable in the winter as well as in the summer.
Here on our Sunday program.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Ledbetter. Welcome to NBC5 In Depth. For months, we have been focusing on the damage, the rebuilding effort in the wake of intense summer flooding in parts of our region, especially in Mountain Valley towns and riverside communities like Montpelier and Hardwick and Barre, which suffered huge losses. The repair bill still really a moving target. Last week, state lawmakers convened a joint hearing at the Capitol to get an update on the recovery effort and to gauge what new state resources will be needed in the months ahead. Some 300 FEMA staff remain on the ground in Vermont trying to help. Well, soon after the July 10th flood hit, Governor Scott appointed a top aide to be Chief Recovery Officer for the state to navigate the federal bureaucracy and coordinate assistance to individuals and business owners and communities. He said the goal will be to build back better. Well, Doug Farnham is with us this morning. 4 months into this, how do things look?
So I would say they look better than they did 4 months after Irene. But we learned a lot since Irene. We've changed our resources in the state. And so we kind of do have higher expectations for ourselves now. You know, after you go through something like that, if you don't learn from it, it's kind of a black mark, right? So I do think we're pushing forward. The timing of this event, it was a little bit earlier in the year. Irene hit, in later August, I think it was.
That's right.
This event being in July did give us a little bit more time before the winter, so that's good. But I do think we still have a couple big challenges ahead of us now that we're seeing temperatures go below freezing.
Yeah, it snowed this week for the first time. And, if you have a perilous housing situation, that's concerning. Let's start there. Mm-hmm. How many houses that you know of were destroyed or damaged, and how many have now been at least temporarily placed?
So we, in the FEMA data we saw, and so when I say that in the FEMA data, that means that someone had to report it to FEMA and check the box or report that they had heating system damage. And so that was right around 700. That only covers really the primary occupants, right, the homeowners. And in different communities, they have different levels of rental population. So we were able to engage more directly with those homeowners, that 700 population. And we've been able to do some good work narrowing that down so that we're still working with right around 100 households to try to make sure they are able to repair if their home can be repaired in time for the season. I think some homes were damaged so significantly that fixing the heating system is kind of the least of their worries.
Yeah. And
they're going to need other solutions like the transitional temporary housing unit program from FEMA or the non-congregate sheltering program. I think it's an unavoidable reality that some households won't be able to stay in their homes this winter.
Where are they?
So those households, they're generally eligible for rental assistance. Some of them are staying with family, and some of them were able to locate another rental, and some of them are on the list with FEMA for the transitional housing units. I know that we have right around 20 people in the Montpelier area, Montpelier-Barre area, that FEMA is tracking for that project that's trying to go in Montpelier.
At the former golf course?
At the former golf course, yes.
We heard this week that the deadline to apply for FEMA emergency assistance has now come and gone, but FEMA is still here in the state. Where does that flow of money stand at this point?
Yeah, so we're a little bit over 22 million that FEMA has distributed in individual assistance. That number hasn't been increasing as quickly recently, right? So it has been tapering a bit in how much it's speeding up. We did see, though, over 30 registrations the day before the deadline. I haven't seen the final numbers for how many people registered yesterday, but we did see a big spike on the day before the deadline, considering we were having about 7 people or so register each day. But the extension, so originally the deadline was September 12th. So overall, FEMA was able to extend us for about 49 or 50 days. And we saw a very sizable number of registrations come in during that extension period, so that was worth it.
What would explain why you would wait until the very last moment?
So I think there's a number of explanations. Some of them have been smaller claims where Vermonters don't always go right to asking for help, right? So some people had smaller levels of damage and it was more of I don't necessarily need help if I don't want to take help from someone else. And it's not a zero-sum game, right? FEMA doesn't have an amount allocated to Vermont. So nobody claiming assistance in Vermont is taking money from another Vermonter. Of course, it's all paid for by taxes, so it has to come from somewhere. But if they had damage, we had to encourage people to come forward, and we definitely saw some of that reluctance to ask for help. There were also some people that were just very overwhelmed and traumatized by the event, and FEMA does their best, but they do have a complicated process, and it can be challenging for people. I was speaking to someone earlier today who he has cataracts, and it's very, very difficult for him to interact with paperwork. He can't really focus on the page very well, so he has needs that aren't easy to address. And while FEMA does make an effort to help people, I think it is challenging to help people that need that greater level of support. And we've been working to provide more support, but I'd say we're not providing as much as we know is needed right now. We're still trying to ramp that up and give people more help.
Let's talk about small businesses. I guess you celebrate every victory, and there was one this week when the governor was up for the reopening of the East Calais General Store. We've seen so many small business owners in places like Montpelier and Barrie and Londonderry and Ludlow, but how satisfied are you with the responsiveness from SBA and with the state's efforts to provide grant funding in the weeks following the flooding?
So I think that the willingness of the legislature to move forward the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program, that $20 million, that was exemplary. That was great to see. I think
that's gone.
That's basically fully allocated at this point, right? We had a lower threshold, and that allocated maybe 40% of the money, and then a couple of weeks ago we went back, got a higher threshold approved, and I believe that's essentially fully allocated. And the nice thing there is that, this is a rough cut, it's not perfect, but that $20 million did put the businesses roughly on par with the $22 million of individual assistance that individuals have received. So we saw that gap early on as a state and as a group, and we've tried to fill it. Now, have we filled it completely? Have we made people whole, small businesses whole? Definitely not. I mean, the amounts of damage in downtown Montpelier and the business community are, multiples of what we were able to provide through the BGAP program. Unfortunately, as a state, we just don't have the resources to make all the businesses whole. It's not something that we'd financially be able to achieve. There was just too much damage. I think the overall damage estimates, I would not be surprised if over $1 billion of damage was done by the flooding this July.
Just to small businesses?
Or overall, all types of damage. Small businesses being a big chunk of that.
This is a $1 billion storm.
Yes.
So where do we go from here? Well, we'll have more in just a moment. Back now, discussing Vermont's continuing effort to help individuals and business owners recover from historic summer flooding, to build back better, as we so often hear. More now with Recovery Officer Doug Farnham. Do you sense a disaster fatigue? I mean, we've had so many federal declarations since Irene, and even this summer alone, multiple counties. And I'm wondering, is there a risk now some Vermonters are just, moving on? Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not seeing as much disaster fatigue. I am worried about the potential for disaster amnesia if we don't act this year, if we don't really take advantage of the moment and make sure that we make some adjustments and investments. We have had a fairly strong effort over the last 12 years in resiliency. We've had ongoing programs that were started in Irene and continued. But obviously, we still need to make massive investments. I think, as opposed to fatigue, I've actually noticed a change in attitude in the other direction, where a lot more people, this event in particular, I think pushed a lot more people over the edge towards, okay, this is really something we have to deal with and take seriously. I think many people were taking it seriously, but I think more people are more invested and willing to talk about resilience and willing to spend money on it. And that's what it comes down to a lot of the time is, where do you put this in your priorities and how much money can we afford to spend on it?
Are you referring to the legislature?
The legislature, local communities. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about resiliency improvements in communities, a lot of that comes down to the municipal side of things, not necessarily the state side. The state has a role in supporting it, but a lot of the burden of setting your community up to be resilient and grow in the right manner, it does come down to local decisions.
Our interview this week took place in an old state building in Berlin, near the airport. Farnham, along with the governor and the rest of the team, still holed up in temporary space here, because executive offices near the Capitol remain unusable to this day. The treasurer, attorney general, auditor, Supreme Court, among many others, forced to evacuate.
The high water mark when we came was right here. And so, thankfully we have a nice tall granite foundation.
The Secretary of State's building sits slightly higher than the rest. The basement filled with water, but Sarah Copeland-Hansis and her team were cleared to return in September.
I think it's clear that there needs to be an assessment of which of the buildings along this side of the street are most historically relevant or most valuable. And they're going to need to be hardened off significantly.
The basement is still no man's land.
Yes. We're not allowed in the basement. The basement, I think, was full to the rafters on July 11th when the sun rose and people came down to... Well, we lost everything that was in the basement, and thankfully there was nothing irreplaceable, but we did have a lot of voter registration forms, a lot of the extra election day materials that we might send out to a town clerk if they were to call and say, hey, we need another voting booth set up or whatnot. The sad and frustrating thing is that, this is going to happen again. We know that Montpelier is vulnerable. We're vulnerable in the winter as well as in the summer because we could see an ice jam flood do much the same damage that we saw this past summer. And so we've got to figure out how to harden these buildings. And
Is there a consensus yet about what to do?
I'm not aware of a consensus yet, and I think it's probably going to be unique to each building.
It will be up to the legislature to figure out what to do next, but Copeland-Hanzas is convinced.
And I think with a volatile climate, we're surely going to see weather events that could do this again. And so it's a good time for us to consider how do we harden off these buildings to protect them. Because I don't think that we can really conceive of picking up this entire community and moving it up onto a hill somewhere.
What do we do about Montpelier?
So I think after Irene, there were, I think, 4 main proposals that were developed for the legislature to consider on how to approach reconfiguring and the Waterbury State Complex. I think we will certainly approach the Montpelier complex differently because Montpelier is a different city than Waterbury, right? It's a different footprint, it's different interaction with the river, different buildings. So I think we're going to need to develop those options as far as the large buildings go in Montpelier, but also how we approach the space next to the river. We've got those large parking lots there. There's a couple different ways to approach that. Most of the buildings in the Capitol complex have some contributing historical value, right? So that needs to be balanced. And I think one of the dangers is we are hoping that we'll have the buildings in the Capitol complex repaired enough to reoccupy on a temporary basis for the session. But that's just temporary reoccupation, and
In January.
Mm-hmm. And it's not going to solve all of the mechanical issues, right, that need to be addressed on a permanent basis. And you can look at that building from the outside, and it looks just mostly like it did before the flood.
You mean the
right?
Pavilion Building?
The Pavilion Building or 133 State Building. Those are the two most damaged buildings, right? If you look at them from the outside, they don't look that different. But we still have a massive amount of work to do on the inside to make sure this doesn't happen again.
The governor is up here in a little closet, still months after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that everyone at home understands just how much displacement there's been in Montpelier.
Yeah, I think we've prioritized, done some of the things that we could do remotely. Like for instance, the tax department needed an alternate site to scan and load documents because they have paper checks and everything that come in. So they needed to set up somewhere else so that they could continue to do that. But they only had the critical staff needed for that physical processing set up in the other location. So I think that we've made it work in the short term, and this has been a great site for us, particularly since it's well up outside of the flood zone.
It won't be flooded up here on top of the hill. But in my time, I've seen 3 downtown Montpelier floods where you could canoe down State Street. 3.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to prevent this from reoccurring?
Yeah, I think so. I do think there are definitely things we can do. Many of the things that we could do to prevent the situation of canoeing down State Street won't necessarily happen directly within the footprint of Montpelier. Yes, there are some things that we can do within that footprint and things that we should do. I think the state needs to lead by example where state properties are concerned. We're enforcing floodplain requirements on homeowners, on businesses, and we enforce that rule on ourselves as well to the same degree. So we do need to make sure that how we adjust our footprint in Montpelier makes sense from a historical perspective, but also from a flood risk perspective. And then we need to find natural water storage to reduce the flood risk to places like Barre and Montpelier and Waterbury.
You mean some kind of a federal project, perhaps a dam or a flood wall?
I think we've been having a lot of discussions with the delegation. They're very supportive of some larger resiliency projects. I don't want to speak too much for the Agency of Natural Resources, but I do believe that they prefer more natural solutions. less along the lines of dredging or walls and more along the lines of finding the spaces that we can logically conserve, maybe remove some fill to create water storage in these type of events so that the river level in the downtowns doesn't hit those dangerous levels. I think, in most of our downtowns, our historical downtowns, I think we obviously have to assess how people should be using basements. The Waterbury complex had the basement completely filled in. That was massive amounts of tunnels and space that the state used, and we gave up that space because that's how some of the water got in. So we needed to move away from having a basement in that area of the floodplain. And I was told at one point that we suffered $200 or less damage in the Waterbury State Complex because of those decisions we made.
This time around.
Yeah. Even though there was a picture of it being, completely surrounded by water, some drone shots from above showing it was essentially an island, but suffered no damage.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
Any idea what it will cost to repair the Capitol complex?
We're still working through the early damage estimates. And a lot of the costs would depend on the approach. It's really hard to say, but I do know that when you roll in, Irene was a $217 million public assistance claim. So just the town roads, city and town buildings, just that public infrastructure that's not covered by federal highways. We do anticipate when we roll the state building damage into the event that we believe we're gonna exceed the claims from Irene and be more in the $250 to $300 million range. The state buildings are a significant portion of that, but BGS is still going through with the insurance adjusters and compiling that damage. So
the Department of Building and General
Yes,
Services.
sorry, thank you.
On Thursday, Governor Scott appointed former Commerce Secretary Pat Moulton to be the new point person for Central Vermont's recovery effort. He said that area was hardest hit and needs extra help. We'll be back in a moment with a preview of Tuesday's New York State elections. Well, several states hold elections this week, including New York. NBC5's Benny Nazai joins us now from the New York newsroom. Benny, thanks for being with us. Of course, Tuesday is Election Day across New York State, an odd year election. So what are some of the things you'll be following?
Yes, Stu, as you mentioned, it is an off-year election, which means there's a heavy emphasis on those local races. Right here in Clinton County, you have a county family court race that's up for grabs, a county clerk race that's also up for grabs, and there's a contested Area 5 legislative race going on. And here in the city of Plattsburgh, there are 2 common council seats that are vacant. And over in Franklin County, you have a village mayor's race that will be going on. Incumbent Andrea Dumas is running for her second term against Democrat Mary Scharf, and she is the president of the Malone Chamber of Commerce.
Well, we'll be following that one in Malone. And something unusual, 2 statewide constitutional amendments up for consideration involving tax rates and debt ceilings.
Yep, that's right. And for one of them involves small cities, in particular small city school districts. So if you're in a small city that has a population of 125,000 people, you are capped at borrowing 5% of its property for tax base, those school districts that is. And you can use that for any type of money or any type of repairments for infrastructure of the schools and so forth. Now for non-urban school districts, you're capped at 10%. So what voters are now going to be deciding is regardless of any type of school district, whether you're urban or suburban or rural, are all of those school districts going to be at 10%? So for right here in this region, that one school district would be Plattsburgh because they are city-based. So voters will be deciding if they'll be at the same cap limit or debt limit as Peru or Beekman Town or Saranac Lake.
Finally, much evidence of campaign activities, signs, much early voting?
Yeah, if you're driving down the street, you may see one or two of those campaign signs, but absolutely at the Clinton County Government Center, you'll see a lot of those campaign signs because that's really the epicenter for a lot of folks around here to be voting. And yeah, I mean, early voting, there's been a huge turnout of that. According to officials that I spoke with, a lot of it has to do with, a lot of those contested races here in the North Country.
We'll be watching Tuesday night. Benny Nazai, thank you.
Thank you, Stu.
That's our program for this Sunday. I'm Stuart Ledbetter. For all of us here at NBC5 News, thank you.